Venice Lagoon is endowed with a unique environment in the world, an environment in which man and nature over centuries have maintained a delicate balance. We owe to the Serenissima Republic and its engineers and mathematicians many of the works that have saved this ecosystem from being buried in the mud, carried into the lagoon by rivers, as well as the construction of retaining walls to defend the city against the sea. But today, Venice is dramatically threatened by subsidence, the sinking of the lagoon floor, and of eustasy, the rising sea levels as the result of climatic changes. The phenomenon of subsidence of an anthropic nature was neutralized by a special decree in 1973. The decree prohibited the extraction of large quantities of water from the lagoon floor for the productive cycle of Porto Marghera's petrochemical plant. The lagoon, 550 square kilometers in size, is connected to the Adriatic Sea by 3 entrances: the one at the Lido, the one at Malamocco, and the one at Chioggia. The lagoon is not a lake. The lagoon is a living body in which the balance of dynamics can be maintained only if they are looked after every day. The Lagoon of Venice is the only type in the world which has lived for 1,000 years with this balance. It managed to do this because there were certain rules imposed by its government. This balance between the earth that enters the lagoon from the rivers and the earth brought in by the tides of the sea constitutes an environment that is a kind of natural sponge which stays that way if it is taken care of day by day. Since the fall of the Republic of the Serenissima, this maintenance has been interrupted. Grandiose projects were launched, which in turn initiated the devastation of the lagoon. The tides last 6 hours. In 24 hours, 4 times. This lasts about 12 to 13 days. Then, in the period of the half moon, as we fishermen call it, comes what we know as dead water, which lasts 2 to 3 days. So, in reality, the danger of high tide periods covers only 1 week. This high water is influenced by the Scirocco winds as far as Venice is concerned, and by the Bora winds as far as the Chioggia base is concerned. When we have the largest inflow or outflow of water at the 3 entrances to the lagoon, we have a total volume of about 20,000 cubic meters a second going in or out. I always give this example. The outflow of the Po River, at an average, is about 1,500 cubic meters a second, and it's at its maximum about 10,000 cubic meters. The Lagoon of Venice is not very deep. Between sandbanks, sandbars, shallows, and other formations, a great part of the lagoon is occupied by land. But there are canals, navigable canals, and artificial canals, among them the notorious Petrol Canal, a real water highway where we can find depth of 8 meters, 10 meters, 12 and 15 meters, with deep holes carved out by currents, like the hole below the fort of San Andrea, a hole 28 meters deep, or an enormous hole in front of the dam of Santa Maria del Mare, which is about 40 meters deep. The Lido entrance is used to allow passenger liners to pass in and out of the lagoon, and has a depth of about 12 meters.
Nella parte più profonda. La bocca di Malamocco viene utilizzato per far
passare. The Malamocco entrance is used for freighters, container ships and petrol tankers, and has a depth of about 14 meters.
La profondità di 14 metri.
The entrance at Chioggia is the lowest, about 8 meters, because only fishing vessels pass through there.
È chiaro che avendo aumentato la sezione delle bocche adesso.
Once you increase the opening of the entrances, as the project of the Mose does, then a lot more water enters the lagoon.
L'acqua che entrava si manteneva più che altro nella laguna centrale.
Of course, it is true. We have high water more frequently now than 100 years ago, and we have a higher sea level. In fact, over the last 100 years, we registered a rise in the level of the sea of about 23 centimeters.
Un aumento del livello marino di circa 23 centimetri.
The enlarging of canals, of making them deeper, of straightening canals instead of keeping to the morphologic course of the lagoon, means you are putting more water into the lagoon, which means exposing yourself to more flow of water coming in and out of the entrances, which means the degrading and removal of silt, a vital component for the survival of the lagoon. 120 to 130 years ago, the entrances were completely different. They were not reinforced, there were no piers, and the depths were far inferior, perhaps 3 to 4 meters only. The New Venice Consortium is a pool of major private enterprises which has been granted the exclusive rights for all projects designed to safeguard the Venetian lagoon. The consortium has insisted on the use of an impressive system of mobile and submerged sluice gates known as Mose. These sluice gates, hinged on concrete foundations, will be positioned on the seafloor of the 3 lagoon entrances and during normal conditions will rest on the floor inside container-like structures called caissons. They will go into action when the sea level rises more than 110 centimeters above the average level. With the help of a compressed air system, the sluice gates will be emptied of water, which acts as ballast, and they will rise out of the water on rotating axes. It is these rotating axes, already in an advanced state of construction, that have caused more than perplexity among experts, politicians, and ordinary citizens who are opposed to the Mose. Over the last 1.5 centuries, Venice has suffered high water more frequently and always higher. Now, the real problem is to understand why this has happened and to remove the causes. The Mose, however, does not ask itself what is the cause, but intends to solve the problem of high water by manufacturing huge sluice gates, which for simplification are submerged and are raised when the level of the sea exceeds 110 centimeters above the normal level. In fact, all the studies by experts and environmentalists show the general conditions of the lagoon, little by little, have been modified as the result of human intervention. High water has become frequent. This means when we dug out the petrol canal, it became a huge highway for the tidal waves. The same effect when we built the retainer dams on the lagoon entrances and extended the depths of the entrance floors. When we built Marghera, taking away an enormous part of the lagoon from tidal expansion. When we filled in parts of the lagoon to make an airport, and then the first, the second, and the third area of land reclamation, where there is supposed to rise a third industrial zone. Little by little, as we did all that, the frequency of high water increased for a very simple reason, and that is that the lagoon basin was being reduced in size. We have a sea which every 6 hours comes in and goes out. So if more water comes into the lagoon and the area of water is reduced, the water level rises.
110 centimetri non vuol dire 110.
I have to explain something. When we talk about 110 centimeter average tide, we refer to a zero average sea, and we don't mean the level of water rises 110 centimeters in the city, which would mean water to our armpits. In fact, with this 110 centimeter tide, we would have water only in the lowest part of Venice, like St. Mark's Square, where we would have about 30 centimeters of water, and in the rest of the city about 10 to 15 centimeters. For example, on this embankment, which has been built up, the water will spill onto the pavement only if the tide is 115 centimeters high. In many parts of the city, the embankments have been built up, but now there is no more money available for this kind of work, because the money has been hijacked by the Mose project. Of course, 20 to 30 centimeters of water is a problem for those who live in Venice and have to wear rubber boots, with streets flooded, water in shops and in the ground floors of houses. But this is not yet a flood disaster, as we saw in Mestre Marghera at the end of September 2007. What would have happened if the Mose was closed on that day, and the water would not have been able to exit the lagoon? That would have been a double disaster, both for Mestre and for Venice. This black line we see on the embankment is the mark for the average tidal level. In the past, when no other instruments to measure water levels were available, this line was taken as a guideline for any project or intervention in the city. Those against the Mose want to escape this cycle of high water, but we want to do it by removing the causes. Today, there exist 9 to 10 alternative projects, which the municipality of Venice has finally analyzed, confronting one with the other and putting them in front of the Mose. The result was that from a point of efficiency, and I mean by efficiency the degree of protection from high water, environmental impact, cost and time of construction, the Mose ended up in second last position. One of the most scandalous points about the Mose is that it is not a project born and administered by the municipality of Venice. It is a project tendered out to construction companies for planning, for experimentation and realization, so violating every accepted administrative and economic rule. But the most fundamental problem of the Mose is that it is an antiquated project, an engineering project whose concept comes out of the 19th and the 20th century. The Italian law, still valid in Venice today, specified 3 conditions adopted from the past Venetian Republic as basis for any intervention in the lagoon. Any project had to be gradual, experimental and reversible. Reversible in the sense that if one saw the effects were negative, it was impossible to quickly dismantle the erroneous works, like in the case of the direction of a new canal or a particular shore fortification, etc., etc. The Mose is based on particularly heavy and massive techniques. At the base of the Mose are containers 60 meters by 25 and 15 in height, like a 5-story building in reinforced concrete. These containers holding the hatches of the sluice gates are installed as fixed and unremovable items. The Mose is a permanent project. Just think, the foundations are made up of 12,500 rods fixed below sea bottom at the entrance to the lagoon at a depth of 47 meters. Under the lagoon exists an enormous deposit of methane gas. So large, the constructors were forced to build a chimney stack on the artificial island they have built on the Lido entrance to air the methane, which would automatically invade the underground structures with lethal consequences.
Oggi noi stiamo realizzando le opere preliminari di una mega opera.
Today we are completing the preliminary works of a mega project the size of which Italy has never seen. A project totally illegitimate because it has no evaluation of its environmental impact, which is required by Italian and European law. The works were authorized only by a mechanism of political evaluation, certainly not technical evaluation.
Bene, noi stiamo realizzando quest'opera che è contraria a tutte le leggi.
The Mose was supposed to be designed in such a way that it would not alter the balance between sea and lagoon. This was done because in no way did we want this balance to be violated or become lopsided during the time when the sluice gates are not in operation. How could we achieve this result? Since the Mose has a flat and cemented seabed, it would be necessary to slightly reduce the openings of the entrances. The volume of water going in and out would therefore remain identical, since the seafloor would be dug out and the entrances reduced at the same time. However, the velocity of water would considerably increase, as already happened after the creation of the Bacan Island. The speed of water impacts dangerously on the erosion of the seabed and the very foundations of Venice. At times, when the Mose is not operational, the quantity and powerful flow of water will be tremendous. Already now, with the first works, fishermen are saying that the currents have changed. The captains of the passenger ferries have also noticed this. And remember, we haven't even started yet placing the hatches. The Mose will increase the medium and high water levels and will actually go into operation only when the high tide levels exceed 110 centimeters above the average level. It will only be ready between 10 and 12 years from now, and at the phenomenal cost of 4.2 billion euro.
4,2 miliardi di euro.
Ecco, adesso vedete qui I cantieri della bocca di porto.
Here you see the workshops at the Lido entrance. On your right we have San Nicola. And there you see the crane which operates on the dam side of the Lido.
Che stanno operando sul lato della diga del Lido. E questa praticamente, quella che vedete qui in
This,
centro,
what you see there in the center, is the Bacan Island. They built this new island because, as you see by that barge on the right of the island, there will be a first series of sluice gates which will have to close this side of the entrance.
Isola ci sarà una prima serie di paratoie che dovrebbe.
Then, from the new island to Punta Sabbioni, there will be another formation of sluice gates. In this way, the Lido entrance, the largest of the accesses to the lagoon of Venice, will be broken up by the newly built island, and this will completely modify the tidal cycle. The Mose is a project born in the 1970s after the exceptional high water of November 3 and 4 in 1966. This was the date of the historic flooding of large parts of the Veneto province. Tried out as a model between 1988 and 1992, the Mose was initially financed with 435 million euro. Work officially began on May 14, 2003, when the former Prime Minister Berlusconi laid the first stone. Today the cost estimate has gone up to 4,270 million euro, and the project is supposed to be completed by 2011. The solution envisages 18 sluice gates at the Chioggia entrance, 19 at Malamocco, while at the Lido entrance, twice the size, there is this intermediary element, a real island between two formations of 20 and 21 sluice gates. We are therefore looking at a total of 78 sluice gates, 20 meters each wide, with a total length of 1,560 meters, with heights that vary from 18 meters at the Lido and Treporto to 29 13.6 meters at Malamocco and a thickness variable between 3.60 meters at the Lido and Treporti and 5 meters at Chioggia, depending on the depth of the canal. The average time envisaged for the closing of the entrances is between 4 and 5 hours, including the time for opening and closing the sluice gates. The Port Authority of Venice has requested a shelter for shipping at the Malamocco entrance for the transit of vessels. This is to guarantee the operational continuity of the port, even in a limited capacity when the sluice gates are functioning. The basin, protected by rocks, which will create a shelter of calm water, protected from waves caused by engine power. It'll be located on the southern side of the entrance and is about 370 meters long and 48 meters wide. At the entrance of the Lido and Chioggia, refuge harbors and small shelters for vessels will allow anchorage and transit between ports for rescue boats and fishing boats and when the sluice gates are up. Ship pilots are perplexed by the use of these shelters, especially at periods of high tide. Some criticism of the project comes from the cost of maintenance after construction is completed. There is talk of 30 million euro a year for service and maintenance, but no one has ever officially offered a price tag. This number would force the state to shell out a hefty sum each year. Besides, the consortium which has the task to build the Mose is responsible for its functioning only for the first 3 years after its completion. So anything broken after 3 years following the end of the work would fall under the already considerable costs of running expenses. One of the issues rarely considered is the fact the Mose is based on underwater technology. The entire structure is below water. All the cables, all the transmissions, the entire complex system of running those 78 gigantic sluice gates happens underwater. No one has yet worked out how much the maintenance will cost. And when I say maintenance, I mean the daily running to make sure everything functions. And so far, no one has decided who will pay for it. The real business, I say, and the real damnation is the problem of the cost of maintenance. International experts, and here we are not talking about the ordinary environmentalists, have said every square meter of the structure which remains underwater all year round will accumulate about 24 to 28 kilos of fouling. These are the incrustations of seaweed, which we call peocci, and shells. Apart from making the entire structure heavier, they must be removed because they tend to block the metal frame, which is the most delicate part. For this task, it is envisaged as part of the project that each year a certain number of metal hatches are taken off and substituted by a vessel built especially for this removal task. Of course, this will have exorbitant costs. The engineer Scotti, who designed the Mose, continues to tell us whatever the envisaged level of the sea as the result of climate change, up to 1.5 meters, the Mose will be able to cope. Sure, the huge hatches will rise and descend. But the real problem are the 150 to 160 days a year when the entrances to the lagoon are closed, which means we will drown, I am sorry to say, in our own shit. Everyone knows that the only possibility to survive for the Lagoon of Venice is the tidal exchange. We will therefore drown in the organic refuse carried from the urban areas, as well as the poisons and pesticides which come down from the mountains and which the rain water carries into the lagoon. The devastation has already begun. It's enough to go to the entrances at Santa Maria del Mare, to Caroman, to the Alberone, to San Nicola, to see what's already happening. In these places, the workshops of the Mose assemble these prefabricated structures, which are the size of a palace and have 5 floors high. They're assembled in a protected area, in an area under global care, as a reserve of nature. And that's only one example. For the construction of the enormous caissons, 60-meter long, 25-meter wide and 15-meter high, and for the preparation of the entire system, they have opened a special workshop in the Santa Maria del Mare area near the Malamocco entrance.
I cassoni pesano 12.500 tonnellate l'uno.
The caissons weigh 12,500 tons each. In order to rest on the seabed, a construction of this size, they have to build a massive foundation. Here we see the construction of an embankment with material dug out of the entrances and sand from the seabed. Then everything will be covered with small stones, and then with bigger rocks, and in the end everything will be cemented over in the entire area.
Con dei sassi di piccole dimensioni, poi andranno quelli più grossi e poi probabilmente alla fine verrà fatta la cementificazione totale.
They are planning to drop cement over 20,000 square meters. And we know it will be impossible to ever regain the original look of the land, since the removal of 20,000 square meters of cement will cost even more than the cost set aside for the original work.
A maggio di quest'anno, del 2007,
In May this year, 2007, the Natural Observatory of the Lagoon of Venice, part of the municipality, presented a study on the damage caused already by the workshops of the project.
creato nell'ambiente lagunare.
These are damages of considerable extent.
I danni di una certa rilevanza. Abbiamo che nella bocca di porto
On the entrance to the Lido Canal, they built a shelter for shipping on a 3-hectare area labeled an Area of European Community Interest. And they built it without asking for authorization from the European Community.
la costruzione dell'isola che è
The construction of the artificial island on 8 hectares has played havoc with the flow of water from the Lido entrance.
volume sulla bocca di porto. Nella bocca di porto di Malamocco
At the Malamocco entrance, they built a shipping shelter, also taking over an area of extreme interest to the community, both on the Malamocco side and the side of Santa Maria del Mare.
di Malamocco che sul lato di Santa Maria del Mare.
Quest'area che noi vediamo che è in stato di abbandono fino a un paio di anni fa era coltivata.
This area, which we now see abandoned, was, until a few years ago, cultivated and given to a community for the rehabilitation of drug addicts, as well as other establishments which we see here around us. Now the whole area has been rented out to the companies which will build the containers for the Mose.
Troviamo in due ambiti di tutela.
We find ourselves here in 2 areas of custody. One is the area of shores, which already doesn't exist anymore because it has been occupied entirely by the workshops, and one which we find at our backs here, just behind this wall, which is an area of European Community Interest known as SIC.
Per i 400 operai che dovranno eseguire i lavori di costruzione dei cassoni.
The workshop doesn't directly touch this site, but it is an adjacent area which legally should be in possession of an environmental certificate granting permission for a workshop.
Ambientale per la realizzazione di questo cantiere.
This certificate does not exist, just as an evaluation of the environmental impact of the workshop in that area does not exist either. In fact, these workshops are the ones most contested because they were not included in that area in the original approval for the project. The original plan was for the containers of the sluice gates to be fabricated in Cagliari and shipped to here in order to be positioned at the entrances of the lagoon. But a decision was then made to fabricate them here in this place, so destroying virtually all the existing beach. We must remember that until 2 years ago, right here below us, we had the seashore, and all this new area here has been taken away from the shoreline.
nell'area di Santa Maria del Mare.
In the area of Santa Maria del Mare, they have taken away 14 hectares of the Demanio Marittimo zone. This is the area where work was stopped by the Ministry for the Environment.
Sono stati bloccati dal Ministero dell'Ambiente
Because the workshops had no evaluation certificates for environmental impact.
di impatto ambientale e di incidenza ambientale.
Dove verrà la spalla del Mose in questa situazione?
Alla fine della nuova massicciata che vediamo.
Cioè in quel luogo prima del capannola di quel tetto?
I primi due pali elettrici che spuntano,
sì?
Dall'altezza di quelli fino a quel capanno che vediamo laggiù.
That will be the installations for the shoulder of the Mose. From the closure of the Malamocco entrance, it's the longest shoulder of the entire project. It's 200 meters long and 50 meters wide and 7 meters high. One of the issues never taken into consideration is the fact we have a huge environmental impact in the areas where all the material is being dug up. In Istria, they have opened 9 quarries or have reopened closed quarries in order to obtain the enormous quantity of material required for the entire Mose system.
Necessario per la realizzazione delle opere di difesa e contenimento di tutto il sistema.
I'm also convinced that the abnormal growth of Japanese seaweed and local seaweed, which we are witnessing these days, is not only connected to the annual thermal changes, but the activity of the workyards in operation and their great movement of mud. This is something that also happened during the excavations of the Petrol Canal.
Altra zona che ha avuto delle ripercussioni notevoli.
Other areas which have had notable repercussions are the Chioggia entrance, also an area of community interest. Over there, they have also practically destroyed an area of 6 hectares, which was an oasis of European community interest.
Un'oasi di interesse comunitario.
There are those who say there have been other major projects in the lagoon. In fact, there were 2. First, the Murazzi, the seawalls. The Romans already began with these defense against the sea. Then in the 1700s, the mathematician Sandrini, who worked for the Republic of Venice, built the actual seawalls, which were eventually modified. Second, there were changes to the direction of rivers coming from the mainland. But those interventions were always done outside the lagoon in order to safeguard it.
Conservarla.
With these interventions, all of them inside the lagoon's ecosystem, they are following a vision of the 1900s, which tampers with the lagoon and destroys its entire ecosystem. For example, where are you going to dump the 5 to 8 million cubic meters of mud, which will be excavated from the seabed at the entrances to the canals, in order to install the foundation on which the containers of the Mose will rest? This is an important problem. A problem which the new consortium of Venice has so far evaded. And these excavation works on the entrances still have to begin. And when these works begin, we will be effectively at the point of no return. In other words, once you lay hands on the foundations, you cannot turn back and propose an alternative solution to the Mose. They want to pass this off as a reconstruction of the morphology of the lagoon, of its sandbanks or shallows. But in reality, this is a project of immense waste disposal of the mud excavated for the Mose from the lagoon entrances. They have asked the Commission of Safeguarding Venice to be allowed to rebuild the sandbanks on the site of the Marani Canal, between the islands of Vignole, Murano and Saint Erasmo, sandbanks which have never existed. It's enough to consult the hydrographic charts of the lagoon from the 1935 to these days to see that in that area there were never any sandbanks. In reality, the consortium wants to dump right there its first mudloads from the excavations at the Lido entrance.
Ci sono dei progetti alternativi che in pratica
There exist alternative projects which envisage the reduction of tidal flow from the lagoon entrances. For what reason? This way we can cut the top of the tide, which means we can reduce most of the high tide. From calculations we have made, also here at the CNR, we found that in practice we can lower the highest tide by some 20 centimeters.
maree più alte si potrebbero anche abbassare di circa 20 centimetri.
Esistono dei ricercatori del CNR francesi.
We have researchers like Professor Pirazzoli of the French CNR and George Umgieser of the Italian CNR who have carried out computer simulations which showed that by raising the seabed at the lagoon entrances within a year, we can bring back the tide level to that of 150 years ago, which means 1 or 2 modest high tides a year without the need to launch these mega works. Not only that, but we can prepare for another situation. As everyone now talks about, we envisage most probably a rise of sea levels, including the Adriatic Sea, of between 8 to 10 centimeters to 80 centimeters. Let's take half of that, which in the next 100 years would be 40 to 50 centimeters. Now, with 40 to 50 centimeters of higher sea levels, the Mose would have to be closed 156 times a year. That means the ships going to Marghera, which have fixed dates and hours to enter and depart, will opt to go to Trieste or to Slovenia. This would put Marghera out of competition from a commercial point of view. In turn, this would mean the end of an industrial zone, which means taking away an important economic income from the city. As we have the problem of Venice sinking, although this has almost stopped now, we have to remember that it sank because for tens of years they took away the groundwater, with the result the land became compressed and has subsided 23 centimeters over the last century. One could try, if it is possible, to pump water back into the subterranean faults and so raise significant parts of the city. Even that we cannot sell as a sure thing. We can only say that some experts guarantee that, judging by their research, this hypothesis is a real hypothesis. But to carry this out, we need money, and almost all the funds of the special law for Venice have been hijacked by the Mose. Let's take the Lido entrance. It allows 8 or 9 huge megaships to pass through every year. There are 8 or 9 of these giant cruise ships, which come to Venice more than once a year. Now these ships, in order to get where we are at this moment, here at the Marittima, must pass the San Marc basin, moving a huge amount of water. An amount so huge, it's useless to save the embankments with continuous works because the water pressure from the water movement is destroying the bottom of the lagoon and therefore also the foundations of the palaces. According to us, the huge cruise ships, especially the mega passenger liners of the latest generation, should be stopped outside the entrances to the lagoon, as happens almost in every other part of the world.
Il Principato di Monaco, per motivi diversi,
A year and a half ago, the Principality of Monaco, for various reasons, built a floating port at fairly reasonable costs, where these megaships now moor. The passengers are then transported aboard more modest vessels and taken on tours wherever necessary. We are not against cruise tourism, but we want to save the seabed of the lagoon, and we want to save from this enormous danger our palaces. At this point, by banning these huge vessels from going through the Lido Canal, we can raise the seabed from the current 11 meters to 7 to 8 meters, which means less tidal water is coming into the lagoon. The Mose, as I said, is made up of huge hatches, which open up against the entry of the tide. Hatches which are raised when required.
Che si aprono contro le maree entranti, che si alzano quando serve. Esiste uno dei progetti.
One of the alternative projects one which the municipality has evaluated, is called gravity dam. This envisages also the raising of hatches, but in another way, with the help of the tide. It seems simple, but it means instead of fighting the enormous power of the sea, we can use the sea to raise the hatches. What would this entail? That the underwater containers have to be less rigid, that their foundation, which go with their poles 47 meters deep, are no longer useful, and that the sluice gates are mounted on a vessel. During the summer you wouldn't see anything, but when it's autumn and winter, the ships come to the entrance of the canal and are sunk and filled with water. The sluice gates rest on the sea bottom and are raised when it is necessary. Understand this. By the banality of simply inverting the sluice gates through this project of dam and gravity, we can cut the cost by 75%.
Del 75% i costi.
The Mose consumes so much energy, they have to build an electricity station to ensure it can operate, which means the project sucks up a lot of energy. It doesn't use the tidal flow to produce energy, nor does it make it possible to use this method in future. Therefore, the Mose is an antiquated project, not at the level of our times. In view of the water coming in and out of the lagoon entrances every 6 hours, can this tidal flow be used, according to you, to produce electric energy?
In teoria questo certamente è possibile perché ci sono...
In theory, this is certainly possible, since there are projects in the world which already use the tidal flow, like the one in France at Saint-Malo. Obviously, the situation is completely different. In France, we are talking about a 10-meter tidal difference. Here we talk about a 1-meter difference. In addition, we have to obstruct the tidal flow inside the entrances in order to exploit this energy. On the other hand, there is a possibility to combine such an idea with that of an alternative project which also envisages obstruction of the flow, entering the lagoon, and to reach a compromise.
Il flusso entrante in laguna e trovare un compromesso.
These major projects, which always have an impact, can be used for other compatible environmental purposes. This should be the real question, according to me, of the concerned environmentalist. Modern techniques, you only have to look at the Enel website, have a vast list of possibilities for tidal use. In Scotland they have inflatable sausage-like gadgets already operative, which use semi-immersed vertical turbines. In short, technical problems don't exist. The use of tidal changes for production of energy is already a fact in many nations.
È consolidato.
È una delle cose appunto che derivano.
The illegality of the Mose is one of the problems that originated with the choice to hand a project that was not yet designed to a consortium of private companies that have only one objective, their own profit. There is little we can do, since this is the law of the system in which we live, and we can hardly be scandalized if this is the law. But we have to learn how to use the laws, that is, the law of nature, as well as that of the economy. The Venetians knew how to use the laws of the nature, and also those of the economy. The actual clique governing us today doesn't know neither one nor the other.
La normativa europea
European rules prevent that single concessionaries can design, research and realize the same major project. These clear European directives are applied in all European countries except in Italy, where in the case of the Mose it was never respected. In 1993, Italian law received this directive and obliged local governments to form alternative consortiums, different from the old consortiums of companies which had been previously created. But none of these local governments carried out this obligation. The European Community, prompted by environmental associations, had opened a procedure against the Italian government for violations against these directives. But this was also blocked by the lobby of the big companies. In February 2007, 3 experts came to Venice, technicians from the Environmental Commission of the Council of Europe. We accompanied these representatives around the lagoon, and we furnished them with all the documents to show that the Mose project had never respected the procedures imposed by the national and international laws.
La propaganda del Consorzio Venezia Nuova.
The propaganda of the Consortium New Venice is the same as that of all the ministers and governing bodies associated with the consortium. All say the Mose has been completed. Practically all the national dailies tell us that the Mose is practically functioning already. This is a colossal bunch of lies when they say it's finished. It is not yet finished. The submerged works is only a minimal part of the project of the Mose and only complementary to the Mose. In fact, we still have to begin the real and proper mechanism of the Mose. All the works built so far can be converted to dozens of different uses, from tourism to recreational use, dozens of alternatives. The real point of no return has not yet arrived. The excavation, that is the excavation of the seabed at the entrances to sink the foundations, has not yet started. We collectively have the sacrosanct rights, and I would add the duty, to block this environmental and social stupidity in the lagoon of the city of Venice. Because all the monies thrown away on the Mose are stolen public monies, snatched from the special law for Venice, the contributions for the restoration of homes, the contribution to rents, to all those actions which truly serve to socially safeguard our city. We have the sacrosanct right and duty to block the Mose, knowing fully well that nothing will come from the official politics and no one will help us from the palaces of power. Something our brothers also know. Those who fight against the expansion of the US military base Dal Molin in Vicenza, or against the TAV in the Val di Susa, or the dozens and hundreds of big and small projects which devastate our country. From Berlusconi to Prodi, all of them have united to complete these major projects, whether they are for war, for a tunnel, or for an underwater dam. We know fully well that the only way to block these projects is to block the work process. In conclusion, we can say the Mose is an extremely costly project in its construction, its functioning, and its maintenance, with a high consumption of energy. It will destroy the delicate ecosystem of the lagoon and will choke the exchange of water, vital for the productive functioning of the lagoon's habitat. It is the worst possible project. Substantially, it is a mistake which makes persistence with the works of the Mose evil. It must be stopped.